Hey guys, it's Lordafish. So I'm here to try out Nikachu's deck list at top 8'd, and I actually find it pretty interesting. So he's running 4 Cavernous Souls. Now most of you might be thinking, if you haven't seen the list, oh well, how does he make room for 4 Caverns? I mean, he might be running Brazen Borrowers, Force of Negation, Subtlety. You can't just run that many Cavernous Souls and get away with it. Well, he's only running 2 Subtleties main deck, his Force of Negations are in the sideboard, and rather than Brazen Borrower, he's running Harbinger. So I actually found that really interesting. I don't know if Cavernous Souls is like the payoff right now, but considering a lot of decks are running counter magic, especially Murktide, I really do want to see what it's like as a playset. And he's running 4 Spreading Seas in the sideboard, and that is actually pretty interesting, because for a while we saw 4 Tideshapers main deck, that's all the Seas effects will need. But it's pretty interesting because, yeah, Indomitable Creativity is becoming more of a common matchup, and being able to seize them is actually pretty good, so I am interested to see how these Spreading Seas in the sideboard perform. And he's also running 4 Dismember's main deck. I actually think Dismember is really well suited for the metagame, and I can't wait to see what it's like to run like all these copies main deck. But with that said, let's just get straight into the gameplay. So we're here for game 1, and I decided to keep this hand because I'm like, alright, we'll be able to run out Aether Vial on turn 1. The next turn, we'll be able to have Merfolk Trickster out to flash in on our opponent's end step, or maybe we'll be able to tap down a creature like a Mana Dork or something else. And we have 2 Lords just to swing in for some extra damage. Overall, right now, in the blind, I think this hand's perfectly keepable. So here we'll just uptick the Aether Vial, and we draw a basic island. That's fine, here we'll just pass through, hold up that Merfolk Trickster. What's really nice about recent Merfolk lists is just being able to operate on flash speed. It's really nice, actually. Hold up the Trickster, hold up the Vidalian Hexcatcher. So here our opponent plays Sprite Dragon, and I'm like, alright, let that resolve. And then they play a Mishra's Bubble, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess just in case you have another Mishra's Bubble, I was going to tap this down before combat. I didn't have priority before they cast the bubble, so I'm like, okay, this is when I have priority, might as well do it now. Tapped it down, and then I believe here our opponent just passed through the turn, and here we just uptick Aether Vial, and if things go out well, I'll be able to play out Lord of Atlantis this turn and Vial and a Master. So here, just name Merfolk with Cavernous Souls, and I decided to play out the Lord of Atlantis. And then we can just swing in with the Merfolk Trickster. And also wanted to remind you, I probably should have played out the Mutavault instead of the Cavernous Souls. It wasn't relevant, but it probably was the better move, because next turn we're going to start wanting to attack with the Mutavault. So, our opponent bolts the Lord. Nothing we can do about that. It would be nice if we had, let's say the Merfolk Trickster was Vidalian Hexcatcher, and they bolted the Lord. We could have vowed in a Master the Pearl Trident in response to make our Lord a 4/4 so it survives the Lightning Bolt, yet we did not get the chance to do that, so. And then they just play a few cards, get their Sprite Dragon a little bigger. That's fine though. So they decide to swing in with it. We have to take 4. I'm all cool with that. And here, just Vial in the Master. And then our opponent still passes through here. So just leave the Aether Vial alone, just in case you top deck a Silvergill Adept. We draw Subtlety though, and I'm like, alright, gotta play out this Mutavault. And here, I'm just gonna pass through and hold up that Subtlety. And I believe that Subtlety actually was an extremely relevant top deck. So here, just pass through. Our opponent, they play Consider. That's fine, it resolves. And, I did edit this. I'm still getting used to a new software. Forgive if it's a little bit, like, I'm getting better at this, but it's still not going to be perfect. I'm still not, like, using the software yet. I'm, like, kind of, but, like, not really. You're going to see much more improved content in the future when it comes to gameplay. Give it a month or 2. So here, they played the Murktide. I'm like, oh my god, yes, hardcast a Subtlety. They didn't have any, like, main deck Mystical Dispute or something. Let it resolve. It was glorious, just subtletying that Murktide. So leave the battle on 2. We draw a Dismember. That's great. Now we can kill off the Sprite Dragon, and I'm like, yes, Merfolk can beat Prowess. Even though it's historically not a very good matchup for Merfolk. So here, I'm just swinging with everything. And our opponent takes it, and they lose. Alright, that was GG. I'll see you guys for sideboarding. Alright, so we're back for sideboarding, and I know I haven't really done this perfectly, but that's because I haven't played the matchup that often. Now, for sideboarding, I decided to add in 2 subtleties because I saw the Murktide region, and I'm like, this is probably going to be fairly good versus the Murktide, but also any of their extra, like, their Sprite Dragon, Monastery Swiftspears, any of their creatures that might become a threat. Just keep your life total a little bit higher. And I didn't really know what to cut here because I actually liked a lot of the things I had in my main deck, and I'm like, you know what, let's just trim on a couple of lords. Not perfect, and I was thinking about Swaylun because she might be a little slow, and I know she's not really going to help us too much in the matchup, but I was like, let's just cut on lords to be safe. And with that said, let's get into game 2. Alright, so we're here for game 2. In this opening hand, 2 Cavernous Souls, no basic islands, but I mean, we don't really need the basic lands, so this opening hand's pretty fine. Curse Catcher will actually slow our opponent down quite a bit. Silvergill Adept gets some nice card advantage, and the 2 Dismembers are really good actually. I mean, just kill off any of their early threats, early creatures, or even some of their later game threats. Just really, I think this hand's actually really good. Our opponent plays Consider, that's fine. But, overall, I think this is going to, from this opening hand, in perspective, I think this is actually a pretty good way to start off the game. So our opponent shocks, and they go for a Sprite Dragon that resolves. Now, before we, think about dismembering it, remember, I still want to apply some amount of pressure, so what I'd prefer to do is, now we draw a land, so I prefer to just, like, attack with Curse Catcher here, and then hold the Trickster for the beginning of their combat, tap down the Sprite Dragon for a bit, and then on the 3rd turn Dismember. That way I at least get a body out there, and then on the 3rd turn, I'm gonna have one man open, might as well. So they play Expressive Iteration, and I'm like, I really don't want this Expressive Iteration to resolve, and I'm like, alright, Curse Catcher, goodbye. I'm like, my opponent actually, I believe my opponent mulliganed like hardcore, right? And I'm just like, alright, I gotta keep their Expressive Iteration down. Always, especially versus Murktide and any of those blue-red decks, in most cases, you will be very well off just force negating or countering the Expressive Iteration. Do almost anything you can to counter that Expressive Iteration. Also, I played Silvergill here because if I play Master, then the Silvergill will be stuck in my hand. I don't have 5 mana out. But always go after the Expressive Iteration when you can, especially late game. If that's your top deck, that is the biggest threat, okay? Expressive Iteration is a really big deal. I would never try to let that resolve. And especially just sacrificing a Curse Catcher. Now, don't sack like your entire board to Vidalian Hexcatcher. That's not what I'm trying to get at here. But when you can deal with the EI, do it. So here I'm like, alright, I'm going to dismember it. Might as well do it before I take the hit from it. Our opponent just passes through here, and I'm like, okay, another Dismember. Can't have too many Dismembers. I love how we have more Cavernous Souls than... actually, we have an equal amount of Cavernous Souls and Islands, but we have another Cavern in hand. I find that actually funny. Here, just swinging for 6, and our opponent decides to bounce the Master of the Pearl Trident. I'm like, okay, I'll just replay it on my second main phase, and then they're like, alright, we're gonna cast Containment Priest, and I'm like, oh, so you wanna exchange with one of my creatures. You know what? You're empty-handed. I don't mind slowing down my plan with the Master of the Pearl Trident. I want to keep these creatures on the field. And I'll still have an extra Dismember. If I did not have the extra Dismember, it would have been more debatable, since I don't want them, like, dropping some really big threat that I actually care about more. Drawing Aether Vial here, that's irrelevant, but who cares? We're doing so good right now. I don't know what our opponent has, but sure, we'll just play the Vial. Here we're going to swing for 6, and hopefully next turn we'll be able to close out the game. I think right now our board state is really good. Opponent goes down to 4. And then they conceded. So overall, that was actually a really good game for us, because Merfolk is not typically good versus, like, Merfolk does not do well versus Izzet Prowess. It's typically not a good matchup, but I'm glad we were able to make it. And with that said, I'll hopefully see you for the next video.